obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Our Parking Industry Podcast. We are delighted to be here today. I'm Krista Olien. We have Clyde Wilson and Leigh Thomas. Today, we're going to do our follow-up episode to the Tim Maloney Show. We had the pleasure of interviewing Tim Maloney and talking through his history in the industry, all the different ways he has touched different pieces of the industry and how it's influenced where he is today. He shared some great insight, and we would love to get started talking about some of the key concepts that we heard. My favorite part that we discussed was the buy, build, or partner. Buy, build, partner. I always want to say borrow. Buy, build, partner. We hope you're not borrowing. We hope you're partnering. So buy, build, borrow. Whenever we think about this idea, we are really looking at should an operator or someone influencing the industry or conducting themselves in some aspect of parking, should they buy something to solve a problem that they're facing? Should they build their own internal solution to solve a problem that they're facing? Or should they partner with someone else that can solve the problem for them and they develop this relationship that stays, that they work together to solve the problem? So buy, build, partner. Clyde, tell us your thoughts. Buy, build, partner. What do you think?
It's a kind of an interesting concept of regionalizing that statement. The bigger companies have a bigger, my feelings on this, and it may not be the same because I'm not running one of the bigger companies, but when you have your own internal IT department, it sounds like we're seeing them saying they can do that. I can make that. I can make that. That's not what they're in the business of doing. You've got 2,500 locations spread across the country with all different kinds of technology involved in it, and your tech department should be keeping all that up and running every day. The creative building from the inside and from scratch IT companies, in my opinion, and I've had a lot of work with them, is totally different than the ones that are designed to run the IT of this emerging industry that's spreading out in all forms of technology now. When you look at what we're doing, we're touching almost every part of a company that approaches and deals with the public. We're touching all different kinds of technology with them in terms of space availability, communications to the customer, demand rates that nobody seems to understand yet, the ability to communicate with everybody, and the ability to build something that does this is just really hard. And I'm a believer that you should do two things that we don't do well to some degree: buy from an existing IT group or borrow and from an existing IT group that already knows what they're doing, and then have a combination of your team, field representatives, senior management, and IT work with them to get you the product that you want. I've told this story before, and this is from the 60s and 70s. Sears and Roebuck, that's not around today due to a number of reasons that they screwed up as they went into the future, was the most popular big box store of the 60s and 70s. And they had a couple of things that they really did well. Number one, everything had a lifetime guarantee. You take it back tomorrow, didn't matter what you did with it. But in their appliances, they sold an appliance, Kenmore, that was their name. Their brand was Kenmore, but it really wasn't. I think it was a Westinghouse. Sears went to Westinghouse and said, "Here, we're going to sell this as a guaranteed product. This is this is the technology we want you to use to build washers, dryers, refrigerators, that we're going to put the name Kenmore on." So to my parents in the 60s, Kenmore was it. You bought a Kenmore. And to everybody I knew, that's all they talked about. Well, that was because Sears built a name on a product made by somebody else, but they demanded a technology line that would satisfy their guarantee. And I remember having this conversation with Monroe Carroll probably in the late 90s, just quickly. It was, we were seeing each other for another time, and he didn't yell at me. It was nice to me. But, those, I watched that happen to a number of products through the 60s and 70s, and those were always very, very successful. Our tools. I worked in the summertime, a couple of summers, in the hardware department. I actually worked there when I came back from the military while I was going to school. And our brand of tools was called Craftsman. Well, I don't think Craftsman made anything. This was a product that we bought from somebody that made tools, put the Craftsman name on it, and they had a lifetime guarantee. So Sears says, it can't just break tomorrow because we're giving them another one for free. So the quality of our tools were really good, and there were mechanics out there that there were two quality tools at the time, and so we were always competing against the other one. But that was what they did. So to us in the parking industry, I don't think any of us are capable of designing and building the parts, software, hardware system in the world. We're much better off to let somebody else do the detail work and let us say, here's what we want. And be sure that we as a team meet to know what we want, and then have the right people in the company monitor what they're building and be sure we're getting what we want. Because I've been through 40 years of the parking industry where I guarantee you none of that happened. We had equipment that, we still don't have, just in conversations with parking guys today that have been around for maybe not as many years as I have, but a few years. And they all talk about, you can't count anything. We can't count cars. None of this stuff counts. We need to be able to count. So that's something we need to be able to get people that can do. So I'm a big believer in that. I think your three terms were buy, build, and partner. You can buy or you can partner, either one of those two, building on your own. We see Metropolis do this. That's a totally different story in where they are and what they're doing. But we have the rest of the parking industry out there that's got to produce a good product. And I think you're far better off to buy or partner than to try to build your own. Because it's that simple thing of stay in your lane, stay focused on what you do, you deliver customer service to people who are parking their car. Let's try to be sure we do that pretty good before we start trying to build technology. Right?
And we just thinking about, working the day to day, there are always going to be those problems that you see and that you recognize that you want to try to solve. And on previous episodes, we've talked to people, and Clyde's one of them, that they see a problem and they try to go in and solve it because they are natural problem solvers. That doesn't have to be done on an island. So this idea of partnering with someone that can help solve that problem, or, give you the tools to solve that problem, but also accept feedback from you whenever maybe it doesn't solve it the way you're looking for. I think that idea is important too, that two-way conversation. So the idea of partnership, not just, taking something for what it is, but being able to give feedback and really help develop the product to solve the exact need that you're looking for is important. And being able to recognize that I don't have to do this myself. I can go find someone that can help me do this, and we can work together to solve that problem. So I really like that idea too. So buy, build, partner. So tell me about the build. So right now, I think just the parking network, TPN, has seen a lot of people trying to do the build, and we are coming across some issues with that. So for example, we have seen people try to make their own billing systems for monthly billing. And, they work. But are they exactly what we're looking for? Probably not. But they aren't partnering with someone that's an expert. They're trying to build their own internally. So again, like Clyde said, stay in your lane, do what you do best, and then find someone that does what they do best. And y'all both bring that to the table and do a good job. And we're seeing that with all these different e-commerce. People are building their own. They're also partnering. So there's a lot of all three, actually. We're seeing people buy e-commerce. We're seeing people build their own e-commerce, and we're seeing people partner with e-commerce. So that's really being hit with all three of those concepts. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, when you take a look at the real issue here is we're moving away from, I use this all the time. Anytime you guys get tired of me saying it, just let me know. From the cashier reaching out the window and taking cash, so the manager is managing the people in the booth, the cash that's coming. Your biggest transaction with the customer is this person in the booth giving change to the person here or calculating the rate for the person here, has moved totally to an electronic purchase. technology interacting with the customer. So in the ideal world, you would have the technology group over here building the interface, the operator over here who understands the customer, and those two working together to solve a problem. I don't want the tech company giving me something that I have to make a customer figure out how to handle. And I think we're got a lot of that in the parking business right now. We talked about that the other day, and I think on this podcast, about for 80 years, every time we drove into a garage, everybody, no matter where you were in the world, not just here, but everywhere, you knew when you drove in, you were going to go up and you were going to push some button there and a ticket was going to come out. And you were going to need that to be able to pay at the exit. So everybody knew how to park. Doesn't matter how old technology was, doesn't matter how rudimentary it was, everybody knew how to do it. Well, now every time I drive into a garage, I'm working out, how am I going to get in here? What do I have to do to this one? Do I have to scan my cell phone? Do I have to, like in the case, do I not say the product? I won't say the product. We have a product out there right now that has a glass screen push button. Oh, I reach, I can't do it on the screen here. I reach out the window, where to go? I reach out the window and push with my hand. It won't give you a ticket. If you use that many fingers, it won't give you a ticket. You have to stop and only push with one finger for it to give you a ticket. I had to learn that. It took me a while. I may have said a few words I shouldn't have said, but we have made this interface between the new technology flowing in and the customer more difficult because I don't believe the parking operators have, because we didn't have a role in the past of working with the equipment manufacturer. I think we're still there, and we're not finding the person within our organization that is the best at communicating the customer experience, and then a middle person and to explain to the technology person what we're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
We're still a long way from that. If I look at the technology that we have today and identify what I think is the biggest single mistake there is out there, it's that. This chain of communication between the person that knows the customer, that understands what we have to do to supply the customer as it moves toward the technology production piece. And I think Tim was referring to that a lot as we talked through this. We talked about pieces of all of these things that we just talked about. So it brought up a lot of subjects for us to talk about here at in the podcast. But that to me looks like the weakest thing that we've seen.
Yeah, Clyde and I were recently in the Boston area, and I still have this question almost every time I go into a garage because it's one of those things that was popular for a while, and I feel like it's kind of gotten less popular, but it was that you had to pay on a pay on foot before you went back to your car. So it was take your ticket with you because you got to pay before you even get back to your car, or else you're taking a trip to your car, getting your ticket, finding the pay on foot station again. And it was to solve a problem. I recognize that.
Yes.
It was to keep people from getting stuck in the exit lane, trying to pay and it not working and it causing a problem. But it requires, again, it's a learning curve for the parker because you don't know. Usually the standard way is that you pay at the exit whenever you drive up because you left your ticket in your car, that situation. But even like a week ago, we were in Boston and there was a location that we had to pay at the pay on foot. And so if we didn't have our ticket with us, it was going to be kind of a hassle. But there wasn't a whole lot of signage to let us know about that. And if we think about whose role it is to provide the signage in a facility, it's the operator's role. It's not really the equipment. It's not really the parks equipment's role to be responsible for signage and where it's placed and those kinds of things and the upkeep of it, all that goes into signage, but it's the operator's role. But it was, I don't know. So it's an interesting relationship that it's a requirement of this certain equipment that they had in this facility, but it's the operator's responsibility to make sure that the parker knows how to use that equipment, or it's the operator's responsibility to voice to the equipment operator or equipment vendor that they need to change the way the equipment is. So I think it's just an interesting relationship, and there has to be that back and forth communication about what does this unique facility need and how do we get there? How do we get to solve the problem? And if we put something in that doesn't work, what do we do? because a lot of times the answer is rip it out and start over. And that's not the best answer. So what do? I think thinking about those problems ahead of time, but then also finding viable solutions whenever something does come up is really important too, on behalf of the ownership and whoever's footing the bill for those kinds of things. They need to expect that there are people doing due diligence before these big investments are made or before these big decisions are made. So I think it's definitely has to be a lot of communication back and forth between all parties involved, and people need to be open to that too, because sometimes it's hard to hear that maybe your solution isn't what somebody wants. So yeah.
I think Tim giving us that, which has started off our podcast, the buy, build, and partner list was a great way in his conversation to explain to us this kind of hidden group of challenges that we as the parking industry have, and we have to solve these. And we have to solve them almost company by company, because every company is so different in terms of size and resources, to pick one of these that really works better for them. Regardless of which one you pick, there's still that communication between the field and the technology developer. And I think we're still a long way from getting that solved.
Well, all of these concepts that we've spoken about already make me think of this idea of advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
The parking industry needs some more advocates. We need advocates for the first-time parkers. In your facility, do you have signage that we don't need to communicate to the familiar parkers? We need to communicate to the ones who've never been there before. Advocate for those parkers. Advocate for what you need your equipment to tell you. Advocate for the e-commerce platform that your customers need. So we always talk about how operators have an impossible job, but how can our operators advocate better for the things that their garages need?
It is an impossible job. I think having someone that's dedicated and that knows their facility and knows what it needs. So not just working there, right? But knowing it, like intimate knowledge of what happens day to day. Who are my customers? What is my customer base? How often does my garage turn over? Are people there overnight more often than they are over the daytime? Well, who are those people that are there overnight? How many monthly parkers do I have? Is it a valet only facility? Who's valeting their car with us? Those kinds of things. So I think intimate knowledge of your facility will give you the background knowledge and the confidence that you need to be able to advocate for what your facility needs. Because if you don't have that knowledge base, if you are not in your garage with your boots on the ground, knowing what's going on, and also in conjunction with that, looking at the numbers of what's going on and making sure that those two match, you cannot advocate for something that you don't know anything about. So knowledge is power. That's something that I wrote an article on it for our newsletter. One of the very first ones. I had a 7th grade teacher for social studies. Every day whenever we left class, he made the whole class say, knowledge is power, every day. And we thought it was so silly, but if you really break down those words, knowledge is power. So if you have the background knowledge and the information, you can make powerful decisions. So if you are trying to make a decision, the first thing you need to do is be sure you have the foundations and you know what problem you're trying to solve or what question you're trying to answer. If you know that, your decision will be thoughtful and you can advocate appropriately for what you need, what your facility needs, what your parkers need, what your property management ownership needs, everybody that's involved, because as we know, the numbers don't lie. So going back to Clyde's rules to live by, if you know your numbers, you can make powerful decisions.
And sometimes that means you need to call the expert. Once you have your numbers and your data, call the company or the person that is the expert in that field. I had the really cool opportunity of going with Krista and Clyde to a new client's property. And I remember how I felt when I walked into that boardroom. Our potential clients had maps out of the facility, of every level, of every nest, every entrance. There were measurements. It was so cool. And we sat down and we dug into the blueprints and talked about the data and the numbers, and our clients were able to articulate the problems they were having. And Clyde and Krista had a solution. And I will never forget the look on her face. She listened to Clyde and Krista and then she said, wow, that was easy. I thought this was going to be like a whole thing, but because she had walked her facility and she knew she knew about it and she had thought about what is really the problem. Then she had the wisdom to call the experts and boom, we had a solution ready to roll out. That was a really cool thing to witness.
And she could also, because she had that knowledge and that foundation, she could also discern if we were totally BSing her. She would know. And so I think that's true for everybody. Yeah. Like if you know and you have that solid foundation and you have done the work to build out your knowledge about something, you know whenever someone's trying to, pull the wool over your eyes or whatever the saying is. But
or sell you a product that won't actually work.
Yeah. Try to sell you a solution that you don't need, right? I think that's really common too. And that's something that we touched on with Tim, was that there are so much technology coming into our industries. How, going back to the advocacy point and this new technology, parking is being bombarded with new solutions. So how can the property managers, their operators that they have entrusted to run their facilities, how can they discern what good technology can solve their problems and advocate if there's not one? Like, what happens if there's not a technology that they've been presented that solves their problem? If we would have gone back to the project Leigh was talking about and we would have been like, this will solve your problem, I think she would have called us if it was something that wasn't true, because she knew that there was something that she needed. And when she would hear it, she's not a parking expert. No one's expecting her to be, but she called someone who is. And if she heard something that wasn't quite right, I think she would have picked up on it. Because like you said, she was very knowledgeable about the problems she was facing. So how do we help property managers that maybe aren't as knowledgeable discern?
Tim provided that answer. It was hire the experts.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that we're an expert in everything, but we're an expert in some of this really well. We've had a tremendous background in not only working all the different providers out there of a particular topic, so we know who can do it and who can't, but we've also built our own stuff, never to be in that industry, but always to see if we could. When we did flow through and we did FocusPoint starting out and then flow through, with FocusPoint, I never really intended to be a parking app, but I remember this very well. I had in my head that there was a problem that could be solved, and I went to the parking operators and saying, look, I think I know how to do this, and they all blew me off. So FocusPoint was really only created because everybody blew me off and nobody listened. Now they all have one. Flow through was kind of the same way. It was, nobody will listen to, we can do this ticketless, so we did it. I never intended to be in the parking equipment manufacturer. That was certainly the last thing I wanted to be, but we had to go build these things ourselves to prove that they could happen, and now here they are. But Tim said it, hire the expert to get in there and talk to you. It doesn't cost very much to have us, with our experience, sit in the room. And I think we have a number of people over the years who have learned that, some the easy way, some the hard way.
Well, I think you just touched on it, Clyde. So maybe this will just be the buy build partner episode, but whenever Clyde was facing a problem, he tried to go find someone to partner with to solve this problem. And, he couldn't buy something because it didn't exist. He couldn't partner with someone because nobody really understood the concept. Nobody could do it. So he was left with only that middle option, which was to build. And so that if you come to those types of things, maybe that is the only solution, is to build your own and see what happens. But I think it's wise to explore the other two options, but definitely don't close off the third either, because it might be the only answer.
It may be. I can tell you from past experience, that was really expensive, and it solved a lot of problems that the parking industry has solved today, but it certainly cost the parking network a lot of money. And a lot of time.
As a company, we got distracted because of that build avenue. So we got distracted from our goal and what our core values were as a consultant and as, doing financial and operational audits. And it's only now that we are really coming back to the center of what we do. And so I think that's also a lesson learned for us internally. Like, we've been through that whole process, start to finish. So yeah, we've observed it and we've experienced it. And,
Thank you very much, because that's exactly the right answer. stay in your lane. I didn't stay in my lane, and it cost us 6, 7, 8 years of the parking network development because we got focused on doing these other things. Not that I would ever do it any differently again. We created a lot of great stuff that eventually started to have an impact on changing the industry, but it's certainly hard on those.
It changed the industry, and our company learned a lot.
Very
We
much.
have a deeper knowledge about these concepts that people that we're helping, that we're consulting with, we have a deeper knowledge of how to solve their problem and what is actually possible because of that little detour that we took. So I don't think it was all for naught. I think it made us a better company in the long run.
You're right. There's no question that it did.
Well, the idea of distraction kind of leads me to something else that came up in our conversation with Tim, and that is this reality that vendors and marketing are throwing a lot of buzzwords at us that can distract us. So we could talk about the buzzwords, but mostly I want to ask you guys, because you are some experts, what is real? Like, what is, if buzzwords are like kind of shiny finishes on something that's not real sometimes, but what matters? If we're asking operators to do an impossible job and call the expert and stay focused, what really is the thing that is real and is going to stay around and is worth calling an expert if you realize you have a problem in this tiny bit of your operation?
I think there is a wisdom in not jumping at the first new thing. I think there's wisdom in taking a step back, really seeing how something evolves and how it develops. And that's not always the easy thing, right? Because we have all sorts of salesmen in our industry too that will be knocking on people's door trying to get that new shiny thing in front of everybody that they can. But being able to say, not just no, but maybe not right now. And being able to take a step back and see what it actually does and see how it evolves and develops is a really key piece of wisdom. And if you, going back to the knowledge piece, if you have a knowledge about what your facility does, what it needs, how it operates, just how that organism functions, you'll know if there's a new technology that that kind of piques your interest. You'll know if it's a need that you have, and you'll be able to watch it and maybe not jump right when it's new. I think back to, every time new software comes out for my iPhone, there's always an update because there was a bug, right? So just having the wisdom to wait and then proceed once those bugs are kind of worked out is a really important thing to consider.
Yeah, you guys have all heard me rail on and on about people that use buzzwords, and I have come to the realization, and maybe I shouldn't say this quite the way I'm going to say it, but people who are using buzzwords all the time want you to believe they know about something and they don't know the detail. Every time somebody says a buzzword, that means there is a mile of background that even got to the buzzword, and it's still sorting itself out as to what it really is. So, the buzzword can be a topic, but a lot of people try to use it as the end all. I've heard this through the parking industry now over the last 10 years, and especially the last 5, where everybody's dropping buzzwords that are words that are products or techniques that are just not fully developed yet, or may never be fully developed. Or the person mentioning it, the one that I like to use as an example, and there are a lot of them, I could use many. The one that I like to use as an example is demand-based pricing. That's a buzzword. 90% of the people who I'm in front of that say we're doing demand-based pricing, I'm going, you don't have a clue what demand-based pricing really is. So, it's buzzwords are interesting. We have to use them, I guess, to explain the topic that we want to talk about, but we have to be careful of the people who can use buzzwords and not really have any background to it. That's a new thing. I mean, I didn't deal with that for the first 30 years of the parking business, or maybe 40 years of the parking business. Nobody was running around saying buzzwords because the only buzzwords we have, there's a ticket and the ticket spitter.
That was as buzzy as it got.
And you pay cash. So, right. That was as buzzy as it got. Well, now there's all kinds of things, and so all of a sudden I've had to deal with this buzzword stuff starting, I don't know, say probably 6 or 7, 8 years ago. And it's been interesting to watch it being used.
I think I go back to one of the projects we were working on. It was involving EVs and the installation of EVs. And there were groups that were pushing hard because there were grants involved and there's
Yes.
a timeline. We got to take advantage of this and the facility needs it because it'll help drive revenue and all the things, all the sales pitches you could imagine, trying to push this before an expiration date. So there was a lot of pressure. If you take a step back, it's like, that facility didn't need EV chargers. Like that was not a problem they needed to solve. That was not a solution that they needed, but it was being pushed because of this timeline and these sales pitches that had been given. And there was just a lot going on. And so you have to know what your needs are. And it was being sold as a need for that facility. But if you really know the facility or really knew the facility,
Right.
it wasn't going to solve any of the problems that location is having. So I keep going back to this word, but discernment, knowing like EVs are a buzzword. They really are. And they're being pushed hard because of all these outside influences and the companies that are selling them and all the things, the government involvement. But being able to discern, is that something that will really benefit my location? And what all does it actually take to get those EVs installed? Because they hadn't even considered the power that was needed. They hadn't considered any of the infrastructure influences. And they were going to put them on the top level. And it's like, what? And so it was, I don't know. There were a lot of questions that came up, but it was being pushed really, really hard. And the benefits versus, kind of the give and take for that location, it wouldn't have paid off. And that was a problem that they didn't have. And that was not a solution that they needed, but it was being sold to them like it was.
One of the interesting projects that we just worked on, that was the perfect example of an owner who really didn't make that mistake. And that's the one in San Mateo where you have 5 buildings for a high-tech client and you have 2,400 parking spaces. And what was the count of EV stations that they built? Was it 40?
There's 40 in one garage. Well, they're double stalls. So there's 20 in one, but they're double. So there's 40 and 20 in another. So, there's 80 chargers total.
So about 4% of the total they built in a town that there's a Tesla almost in every car around you, right? But they knew the Teslas don't come to work to charge. They charge at home and they have 200 and something miles. So they're not going to charge very often. So somebody thought through this. And I think in most of the other projects that we've looked at, we don't think that anybody really thought through them very much at all. They were selling a buzzword and there were a lot of people buying the buzzwords. But this one, and also this one, the number of EV stations they have weren't occupied.
Yeah. And if they start hearing from their clients or their parkers that I'm trying to charge, like if they start hearing that, they can go then approach that problem, try to find a solution to provide more charging spots for the people because it's a need that they have and solve that need.
And most of that, when it first comes up, isn't adding more charging stations. It's actually managing the station there, because we're not seeing much of that either. And I guarantee you that's coming. So that's another one of those important things. So, Tim, I remember when he moved over to Flash and he got involved in the EV charging very much. And he's very knowledgeable of the EV challenges. And it was good to talk to him in the podcast about that subject because it's such an important subject. And we're really watching it. It's becoming one of those lessons in development that you can sit down and one day you guys will be able to write the story for the people that are working for you about this development of the EV issue and how it interacted with our parking garages. Because at some point it's going to be an exciting story, as well as autonomous cars. We can tell that story now too. We are ready. We got it.
Yeah, and you can't ignore those things either. So it's a delicate balance between, knowing those things like the buzzwords and being able to balance, is it something that I need? Is it something that I don't need? Maybe I'll need it in the future. So it's a delicate dance and a delicate balance because you can't ignore them, right? You don't want to completely ignore these things because you can't. So how do you balance?
Well, and it's something that 2 podcasts in a row, Tim's and Rick West both brought it up, and that was you don't have the power requirements to do all these things. So if you want to plan in advance and get ready, then you darn well better start going to your power company and figuring out how you're going to get the power in here
Is it
in
even
case I need
possible?
to double and triple my number of EV stations down the road. But both of them said that, and both of them are very, very knowledgeable on the EV subject. I thought it was interesting. As soon as Tim said it, I was thinking back to then. We just heard Rick say the same thing. We don't have the power to do these things. So if you're going to start charging down the road to doing them, you might want to go to your power company and start figuring out what you have to do and how much it's going to cost to be able to supply a higher number of EV stations.
Again, develop your knowledge base so that you can make powerful decisions.
And don't think that implementing new hardware into your facility is going to fix the problem. Like while you're waiting on the hardware, consider deeply and talk to experts about how am I going to manage this thing once it's up and running.
Yeah, that in my personal view, the failing to understand the amount of power that's going to be required is one. But the second biggest problem with this is I haven't seen anybody really planning ahead to manage this. That's going to, depending on what happens with EVs, that's going to catch up to us. There's no question that EVs are going to continue to move down the path. But what are they really going to look like when they fully get here? Not what we see today.
We have talked internally quite often about how digital payments is not a buzzword. That is very much a reality that every parking facility that we work with is needing to manage well. And you talked with Tim about the risks of these digital payment platforms. Could we talk about that for a minute? Like, yes, they're a necessity. And yes, most of the time, digital payments are going very well, going very smoothly. It's good for the customer. It's good for the client. But what is tripping up the operation, and what can good managers do to avoid some obstacles of digital payments?
I think to provide a little bit of clarity on that concept first, just for myself, is there's a wide range of digital payment. That's more of an umbrella term. So if we think about digital payments, there are digital payments on site. There are digital payments through apps that the operator manages on behalf of the location. And there are digital payments to third parties. There are digital payments through widgets on third-party websites. There's a wide range of digital payments. So the management of those, it's a challenge. So I wanted to say that first because it's not beyond us how difficult the concept of digital payments is. And right now, I'm not sure they're being managed all that much, especially those that are with third parties. So how can we improve that process?
Yeah, we in the audit business, I think we probably see it at every location. We review and look at the numbers on, and I don't think the parking operators are really prepared for once you moved over to digital payments. You had something not your operation now. You've got to manage another operation that happens to be just putting a number on yours, but you've got to manage them. And we in our industry, we were totally behind on that, and we still are today. From the parking companies understanding that these things are happening, they understand them. I'm not criticizing anybody here, but we never have built the management behind the scenes to manage this third party flow of digital payments. And we're going to have to do that really soon, or we're going to all regret it that we didn't do it. But we see it in every location that we touch, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Leigh, you guys see it, that we are still struggling with probably what we need, the basics of what we need to be able to manage this third. We have the people talented enough to do it, but do we have the product in the middle to be able to manage this? And I think we've come up short there, and it's something we as an industry are most definitely going to have to focus on.
And I think it's a customer service piece that we owe to our parkers. We owe them the basic foundation that we are going to protect the way that they are paying. And so we have to, because we owe them that from a customer service standpoint, that has now lended itself to now I have to manage someone else that's taking payments for my location, and I have a responsibility for the way they do business. That is a big deal, and that is difficult.
It's another one. It's funny in this podcast that Tim handed us. There's all kinds of these major industry-changing topics that have come out of this. And they're things that we as a company, because of what we do, we talk about a lot because we see it a lot. And these are just industry-changing things that we are going to have to get our hands on better than we are. And the companies that do that are the ones that will be the true survivors in this. And the companies that don't and are still managing like they're managing cash from 20 years ago are not going to be the ones. They'll be bought up by somebody else and disappear. But it's a challenge, very, very big challenge with the topic you just brought up.
So I think we covered a lot today, and there's a million little nuggets inside of Tim's episode that we could talk about forever. And I think it would be great if we came back to these topics and we really revisited them. There were some other topics, like the idea of having a mentor in the industry, no matter what business you're in, having a mentor that helps guide you and really shines wisdom into the new things that are happening today and helps you reflect upon being able to make wise decisions is really beneficial. So a mentor podcast, we could talk about all sorts of things, but we touched on a lot today, and we hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time on the Our Parking Industry Podcast. To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on Our Parking Industry Podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.